Well, good morning, everyone. As was already mentioned, my name is Michael Jordan. If you have not met me before, I am sorry if this is not what you were expecting, but I'm so glad to be here with all of you this morning. I'm a pastoral intern here at Hope, which what that means is I am in seminary right now studying to become a pastor, and I've been here at Hope since early January. And I'm excited to be here with you guys this morning as we continue going through this series, The Man in the Mirror. Last week, we wrapped up the session on relationships, going through all the different problems, not all, but most of the problems that we can have with relationships. And this week and next week, we're going to spend a short little bit of time talking about money problems and solving some of those and talking more about them. And so the biblical point of view on money is what we're going to talk about today. Next week, we're going to talk about how to use that money, what to do with those things, how to have pillars of money in our lives as we think about what to do with all of that money. But today, we're going to start on talking about what does the Bible have to say about that. And there are lots of references to money and possessions and what to do with those things in the Bible. It is one of the most talked about topics. There are close to 5 times as many references to money and possessions in the Bible as there are to prayer. So it means, most likely, that this is a very important topic. It is one thing that's exciting for me to talk about because I'm a kind of weird, I like looking at spreadsheets, I like looking at budgets. I was in youth ministry for 6 years, and that was one of my favorite parts at the end of our summer. I loved going on all those trips, but then sitting down afterwards and looking at, did we hit our target? Did we spend over? Were we able to save some money on different things? Money's really important. It affects all aspects of our lives in so many different ways. But with all these different references to money in the Bible, it can get confusing, too. Sometimes it means that we could probably, if we wanted to find a perspective on money in our life, we could find something in the Bible that lifted that up for us, saying like, oh, hey, this is okay to treat money in this way because I can find one verse in the Bible that says this is the way to do it. And so this morning, as we go through this and talk about what is the overall biblical perspective on the Bible, we're going to use one of Jesus' sayings for this. And it comes from Matthew 6, verse 24, and this is going to be our focus verse as we go throughout this morning, where Jesus shares, "No one can serve 2 masters, for you will hate one and love the other. You will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and be enslaved to money." So this is Jesus sharing this with the scribes, the Pharisees, with his disciples. And what he's saying here truly is important. And that's one of the things I love that was lifted up in the book was the verb cannot. It's not saying that this is just a suggestion. It's not saying that this is advised, that you should not serve both God and money, saying that your priorities should be in a certain order. It's not talking about accountability here either, not saying this is a moral choice for you, saying you must not serve both money and God, or trying to serve money over God. It's saying that this is impossible to do both. If you are serving money, if you are captive to money, if money is the most important thing in your life that absorbs most of your time, thoughts, and energy, you cannot serve God. It is impossible. Now you might be thinking, I just got done talking about how we can find different verses to say what we want to say about money in the Bible, so why did I just pick one verse to share all of this with you? And as we go throughout this morning, I want you to hold this loosely a little bit, but to realize as we go throughout this morning, we're going to look at the overall narrative of the Bible and see that this comes up both in the Old Testament, here in the Gospels, and as well as later on in the letters from Paul. And so this is why we're using this as our starting off verse, because the idea as we go through these things is to think about what is Jesus truly trying to get at. It's about our relationships that we have, and our relationship to money is a really important one. But I'm not just lifting this verse up, pulling it out of context completely, and so we'll dive deeper into that. But what I want to say, sometimes we can just pull things completely out of context, like this verse. Some people would use this verse and say, this is why I can do whatever I want, because God is going to give me more money. And so from Luke chapter 4, it says, I will give it all to you if you will worship me. And if you use that as your verse and you say, this is what God intended for me to do, I'm going to get all these things just by worshiping God. I can show up on Sunday morning, check off that box for an hour, and then it doesn't matter how rich I am, it's because God has blessed me with those riches. Well, context absolutely matters. This is a Bible verse we used in seminary when I was in my preaching class, and our professor lifted this up. She came across this in a daily devotional series, and it was the verse for the day. And it struck her a little bit as odd. And so if you understand Jesus, you've read some of the Gospels, and you're understanding this doesn't sound exactly like something Jesus or God might say. A conditional statement like this: if you do this, then this will happen. Usually God is just straightforward, like in the Beatitudes, Blessed are the persecuted. Just saying this is the reality. But here it's saying, if you do this, then I will give it all to you. It seems kind of weird. Well, and that's because it is. My seminary prof, she dove a little bit deeper into this and looked at the overall context. And it wasn't Jesus who said this. It was actually the devil talking to Jesus who said this. So the reality with this is sometimes, yes, if you're looking for something in the Bible, you can find whatever you want it to say if you look hard enough. But the context absolutely matters. Because it's the devil here tempting Jesus up on the mountain saying, if you worship me, meaning the devil saying, if you worship the devil, I will give you, Jesus, anything that you want. But that's not the point. God does not want us just to give. God is not saying, if you worship me, I'm going to give you everything. I'm going to bless you with everything upon everything. There's more to it than just that. And so, as we go through the rest of this morning, I want you, instead of thinking only about what did Jesus say about money, or can we find specific verses to lift up, and we will lift up verses, I want you to also think about, as you consider your own money, how you spend your time and your money, what would it mean to think and talk about that in the presence of Jesus? If Jesus were here right now, sitting at your table, or when we go into breakouts, or later on if you're watching this online later, in whatever group you're a part of, if Jesus was present there right now, how would that conversation go? What might Jesus have to say to all of you? And so he might first off by saying, going back to that Matthew verse, saying, yeah, you can't serve both God and money. You have to choose. You will always be serving something. If you make no choices in your life, choices will be made for you. And then he might go back and he might start reflecting back on the other scriptures and saying, there was a really wise ruler back in the ancient times of Israel. His name was Solomon. And Solomon was one of the most wealthy and wise rulers of his time. He built up the palace in Jerusalem, the temple in Jerusalem, to be this great place that people would come to. It shone the glory of God in its own way. And yet Solomon, who had tons of riches, was also extremely wise, because he said in Ecclesiastes, which is a book in the Bible that a lot of those sayings and a lot of that is attributed to Solomon's sayings, he said, those who love money will never have enough. Once again, highlighting this fact that yes, we will become captive to money if we love that, because you will never, ever have enough. How meaningless to think that wealth brings true happiness. He understands that the motivation here is extremely important. What is it that you're searching for? Are you just trying to get more and more and more? Are you just consuming, taking it all in, hoping for more and more stuff? And please do not mishear me. I like my stuff. I really, really do like my stuff, and it's important to me. However, I know it's not going to bring me true happiness. It's going to, and we have needs in our life, and those needs need to be met. But once those needs are met, going above and beyond that, it's not going to fill that deep longing for something more. So if all we're looking for is a bigger slice of the pie, and then we'll focus on God. Once I have all of these things, once I reach these riches, then I'm going to focus on God. You're never going to get there. There's always going to be more and more to consume. It's part of our reality of our world today, where we're told that it's okay to consume more, that you need to keep consuming more. And yet we need to push against that and say, I want to focus on God right now. Now, as you're listening to me this morning, you might be like, I have my money affairs in order. I have a good relationship with God. Maybe this isn't for you this morning. And that is okay. I'm not saying this is your reality. However, money and our relationship to money is one of the easiest pitfalls for us. There's ditches all around the place when it comes to our relationship with money. And so it's really easy, if we don't think about it, to quickly fall into some of these traps. And so then the question sometimes at the beginning of Matthew 6, he talks about, Jesus is asking, where are we storing up and investing our possessions? Are we focused just on earthly things, on a new car, on a new TV, on nice shoes? Once again, Michael Jordan, thank you guys. If you bought Nike Air Jordans when you were growing up, you supported my college career. No. But the idea sometimes is just like, what are we storing up? Are we building on relationships? Are we building up things that are going to be in heaven, where moths and rust don't get to those things, where they last forever, where people will continue to talk about you well beyond when you're gone, thinking about the relationships and the ways that you impacted their lives, not about the stuff that you had, but the ways that you were fully present in their lives. So we'll never have true happiness if we're only focused on money. Yes, having a lot of wealth, having a lot of money can sometimes make us complacent. It can give us a comfort of ignorance where we can ignore some of the problems around us. It can give us this false sense of security for a while. But at the end of the day, if you do a hard reflection back on that, there's going to be a deeper hunger. There always is. A longing. Something might still be missing. Is there more to life than this? And the answer is yes. Absolutely there is. But one of the ways you can look at this then, as we're going through this, is thinking about our priorities. How do you set your priorities? And in the book, he lifts up two of the easiest ways to look at that, what your priorities are, is how you spend your time and money. Now, he lifts up saying, looking at your checkbook and your calendars. And I just want to do an informal poll right now. I really just want to know how many of you truly still use a checkbook and balance it out like once a week or once a month and look at it all. No shame at all. I'm just truly curious. A couple of you? Awesome. Great. When I read that, I was like, the last 3 checks I wrote, I think I just had to void them because that was for like automatic clearinghouse for direct deposit, and that's what I use my checkbook for. But the important thing is, what are you spending your money on, and what are you spending your time on? And so for me, it's a lot. When I was getting ready to talk this morning, I went through and I was able to look at my credit and debit summaries. Every single year you get, like, from your credit card company or your bank company, it sends out and saying, like, this is where you spent over the past year. And one of the things I realized is I still really like takeout food way more than I like cooking. It saves me some time, and also it's probably way better than anything I would make. But the reality is, when we look at how we're spending our money and how we're spending our time, it shows up on how our priorities are aligned. And just going on in Matthew's gospel a little bit further, after Jesus talks about where we're storing up our treasures, he says, wherever your treasures are stored, wherever you invest in your treasures, there your heart will be also. Realizing that that is a reflection of our hearts. So where are you putting your time? Where are you putting your money? What is really important to you? It's one thing, we can hear about it. If you have been at church 2 Sundays ago, for those watching this online later on, it's the November 14th service. We talked a lot about how you can't serve God and money. That was the topic of that Sunday. And this idea was shared in those sermons as well. We can hear it, we understand that, yes, we can't serve God and money, and yet we go out and live our lives in a way that we think we can. But when we take the time to slow down, to pause, and reflect on our calendar, reflect on how we're spending our money, do our priorities actually show that we're serving God first? Or is it starting to get out of your control? Is it something you haven't taken the time to slow down for a little bit, to reflect on and ponder? How am I serving God? What is God calling me to? Now, I'm not saying every minute of every single day you need to be thinking about your budget. You need to be thinking about every single moment of how am I spending this moment, because then we're getting focused once again on the wrong thing. We're starting to become captive to something else. But are you inviting God in to every single day at some point to be intentional about how you're spending your money, wondering what is God's desire for your life? For when it comes to time, especially, we all have the same amount of time. 60 minutes in every hour for each and every one of us, 24 hours in a day, 7 days a week, 52 weeks in a year. But we have to make choices on how we're going to spend that time, or those choices will be made for us. Last week, I had just gotten back from several trips, and I was trying to get caught up on work, and I had blocked out a decent amount of time on Wednesday to do a lot of things, and then meeting after meeting after meeting got scheduled that day. And those meetings needed to happen, absolutely. But if you don't put boundaries on that, if you don't say, nope, this is how I'm going to spend my time, other people are going to find ways to fill it. Absolutely. If you have kids, if you have a family right now, you understand, going around with your kids is really busy. That can fill your time. Going to sporting events, going to extracurricular activities, going to concerts, things like that, that can absolutely fill up your time. Or if you're a grandparent, going to see your kids and your grandkids, absolutely can take up your time. And I'm not saying the way we spend our time is bad, but it's important to be intentional about how we're spending that time. Taking time to ask God how we're doing that. And so as we go through this, Paul continues to lift this up too, talking about our relationship to time and money. And so as he's writing to Timothy, right before this verse 10, he is saying, people who long to be rich fall into temptation and are trapped by many foolish and harmful desires that plunge them into ruin and destruction. So if that is your goal, if your goal is just to be richer than the day you were before, to have more money, more wealth, more possessions here on earth, it's going to lead to ruin and destruction. Because it's not going to be enough. It really isn't. People who are extremely successful, people who have more wealth than anything in the world, they're still usually missing something. They're feeling like something is empty or lost from their life. And it's because there's something bigger out there. There is, once again, more to life than this. But then in verse 10, Paul goes on to say, for the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. And this is really important. The love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Our relationship to money is the root of all kinds of evil. Money itself is not evil. Paul is not saying money is evil. We need to hate money. We need to despise money. No, he is not saying that. If you have money, if you have savings, if you're saving up for retirement, if you're able to go on a trip this Thanksgiving to go visit family and friends, Paul is not saying that is bad. You need to hate that. He's saying, what is your relationship to money, though? If you are loving money, if you have an infatuation with money, if it consumes most of your life, that is the root of evil. Seeking money first instead of putting God first becomes that root of evil. It won't fill you up. You'll be left feeling like something is missing from your life. Because money, at its base level, is a tool. We exchange it. You get paid if you go to work, you get paid for that. Then you pay it out maybe for bills, mortgages, things like that to rent. You buy goods and services with it. It is a form of exchange, so you're not standing in line at a checkout bartering for things now. You're not like, I have 2 chickens. Can I get 3 eggs today for this? We don't have to do that anymore. We're able to exchange money instead. And it is a very powerful tool. And it shows up in our lives in more ways than almost anything else. Because every choice we make can usually sometimes be boiled down to a money or a time decision. And we need it to meet the needs of our lives and our families' lives. We need money to do those things. We can't say to the companies on the first of the month, well, we just heard this talk on the biblical perspective of money. I'm going to put Jesus and God first, and therefore I'm not going to pay my bills this month. It doesn't work that way. We have to meet those needs. We absolutely have to pay to give those things back. People are expecting those things. We have responsibility for those things as well. One of my favorite examples of how we can try to shirk these responsibilities and give them up is from the TV show The Office. When Michael Scott realizes he is in really bad financial trouble, he walks in the office out of the break room, and then he just very loudly shouts, "I declare bankruptcy!" And then later on, one of the accountants comes in, and he's like, "That's not how you declare it." He's like, "Well, I shouted it. I said it really, really loudly. That's how I'm going to get out of this." And he's like, "No, you can't do that. There's a process to these things." So realizing this is part of a process. There's things to learn. There's ways to dive deeper into this. But there are still responsibilities. And if you are at a place right now where it's hard to meet the true needs of your family, food, clothing, housing, things like that, please hear me. I don't want you to feel guilty about thinking about money and being like, I need money to cover these things. Hopefully you've gotten close with the people in your group, your small group, wherever that might be, and continue to be in your relationship with God, and you can share that with them. I know money is one of the most taboo topics, and as we're moving into a holiday season, it's one of the things usually you never talk about around a dinner table with other people, and yet it shouldn't be. Because as we were just sharing, how we spend our time and money really reflects our priorities. It reflects what's on our hearts. And so being able to share that with others, if you are struggling with that, I encourage you to be able to share that with the people around you. Take that weight, that burden off of only your shoulders. Bring it before God and bring it before the other men in your life so they can help lift you up and carry you forward as well. And so as we think about money and how it can be a tool, there's different perspectives, though, on how we can use that money. In the book, he lifts up 2 kind of ditches that you could fall into, and I want to touch on just one very, very briefly. He calls it the poverty perspective. And I want you to know, if God is calling you into a life of poverty, into a life of potentially living below your needs, but caring for other people, first, continue to pray about that. Talk to family and friends about that. Test that idea out. But there's a lot of great people throughout history and in our world today that are living that life and doing miraculous things with that. I lived in the Twin Cities for about a decade before I came down here for my internship, and there was a guy who was a school teacher, not getting wealthy off of that, but when he retired from that he retired a little bit early from that to become what was called the sandwich man. And so every single night, he goes out and delivers sandwiches to people experiencing homelessness that weren't able to find a shelter for that night. And he's expanded that program to now also give bus tokens so people can go around and ride the bus, especially during the cold winter nights, so they don't freeze to death. He doesn't have a glamorous life, but he's doing it because that's what God is calling him to do. He believes that. And that is not a critique against people like that. This poverty critique is saying that if you are trying to push away all of your responsibilities because you're trying to avoid the pitfall that money can lead you into, then you're not being faithful to what God has entrusted you with. Yes, we can worry about feeling like we become entitled to it, we deserve these things, but then we need to remind ourselves that we're supposed to trust God and lean into God and realize that we've all been given gifts. If you are a talented person in certain ways and you don't share your talents with the world, that's like a slap in the face to God, saying, I don't want to share these gifts because I'm worried about how other people might view me. No, God has given each of us gifts to share with the world around us. So if you have been given talents and gifts, please share those with others. Don't just shove it all away and say, I don't want to have this money because I don't want to be trusted with it. One of the easiest examples of this in the Bible is Matthew 24, where the manager is giving different bags of silver, 5 bags, 2 bags, and 1 bag to different people. And he comes back, and the 5 and 2 bag people have multiplied it, doubled it, so it's 10 and 4. And the other person with 1 just buried it and returns it exactly how it was. And the manager is like, you could have at least invested it, put it in the bank, earned some interest. The idea is, don't just give up on all of your responsibilities. We have things that we can do, absolutely, with our money. But start with God. Start with what God is asking you to do and lean into that. Don't just push it all away. Now, on the other side of this is the one a lot of times I think that it's easier for us to fall into, is the prosperity perspective, where we look at all the things around us and we're like, man, I am so blessed. Look at all of my material possessions. This is a sign that God truly favors me. And sometimes when this gets really hard, really bad, it can say like, oh, all I need to do is just pray more. I put it out to God, and then God's going to give it back to me. I'm going to just get more right with God, and then all of a sudden, all these blessings are going to show up. I'm going to have financial success. It's going to be great. And if it's not yet, it's going to be coming soon. And then this can lead us to start looking down on others. And remember, Jesus is all about love, all about relationships. And so if we're starting to look down on others, that should be a warning bell going off for us. This isn't the way that God has intended for us to say, oh, it must be their fault. They must not be praying hard enough. They must not be blessed in that way. That's not true. Sometimes our world on this side of heaven is broken. There are things that are going to go wrong. Sometimes we just run into situations that aren't perfect, that don't go the way we want. And it turns out that then we maybe potentially land into financial straits that aren't good. Doesn't mean that God doesn't love us. Doesn't mean that we've lost favor with God. But it's an opportunity for us as a larger community to come around and support that person, to lift them back up, to restore their dignity. So this prosperity perspective can lead to consumerism, saying the more things I have shows the favor God has in me. But it also means that we're trying to force God's hand with this, saying that if I give, God must return the favor back to me. It's saying that we start believing that we control God, and it can lead to works righteousness, this idea that I will start to merit God's favor. By the more I give, the more God will give me favor. So for those that do have checkbooks still and balance your checkbooks, realizing you would never have a balance on that. Because God's grace and love for you will always be more than anything you could ever give back to God or give back to your community, because that's how abundant and miraculous and wonderful God's grace is. We are always going to come up short on that balance sheet, and yet that's okay, because God freely gives that gift to us. So then our choice is to choose to be content. Not complacent. I'm not saying be complacent, but choosing to be thankful for what you have. It's an attitude adjustment. It's an attitude shift to have an attitude of gratitude. I know it rhymes. Sometimes it's a little cheesy, but sometimes if it rhymes, it sticks with you a little bit better. Having an attitude of gratitude for things. One of the examples for this I have, when I was a youth director, every single time we would gather with the high school youth group, we would go around and share highs and lows. Something that didn't go great from the past week, something that went really well in the past week. And we had some youth in that group that had horrible lives, really bad family life. Some of them were experiencing homelessness. They didn't know where they're going to go, where they're going to be laying their head to bed that night. They were dealing with some awful situations. But our rule in that group was, if you didn't have a high to share, you could absolutely have lows. If you didn't have a low to share, that's fine. You could just share highs. But if all you felt like you had lows to share and you didn't have anything going well in your life, we asked that you shared one thing you were grateful for. And there was one girl that came to our group over and over again each and every week who struggled with finding a high because her life was awful. And yet the one thing she always shared that she was grateful for is that she was able to be there with that group for that night. She wasn't complacent. She wasn't saying, this is where I want to land in life. This is where I want to stay. But she's saying there's always something to be grateful for. God has shown up in our lives. As long as we have a pulse, God can do something with us. So I want you to hold on to that as well. And then as we have this attitude of gratitude, as we start to be thankful for what we have, it's a reminder then that it's a gift, that what we have has been given to us. It's not ours. We don't fully own it and control it. We're not supposed to manipulate it to do just whatever we want. But it was first and foremost God's, to be given and shared with others. For then we realize that God is truly the great giver. He never buys nor sells, but he gives unceasingly. And the more that God gives, and it's in his nature to give, the more he gives, it seems like the more he has. The more grace, the more love, the more forgiveness that God pours out, the more that there seems to be. And realizing that, turning that into that attitude of gratitude, can release us into a level of joy and freedom. And as we have this joy and freedom, to be grateful for what we have, it can lead us to become what are called faithful stewards. Now, stewards, really old word. It comes from two different things, sty and ward. So stying, taking care of pigs, and warding, making sure like you were taking care of that pig pen. I'm not saying that all of us need to go out and get some pigs and pork and make sure we're taking care of those things, but the idea is to be responsible caretakers. Responsible caretakers for what you have been given. Understanding it's not yours to keep, but it's your responsibility to return it, to increase it, to leave it better than when you found it. Realizing that it's something that ultimately isn't mine. Mine is an easy thing to think about. What is mine? What am I getting out of this? But rather turning it towards God. What does God desire for this? Starting with something really small, understanding that when we're trusted with something small, it can grow into something much, much bigger. And with this idea of stewardship and this idea of being responsible caretakers, we need to be mindful of the needs of the people around us. It's not just caretaking just for my own thing to continue to grow it, but how is it meeting the needs of those around me? Which means we need to have that attitude of humility as well. As we have this attitude of gratitude, as we start to be thankful for what we have, it can lead us to be more humble. And that doesn't mean we think less about ourselves, thinking like, man, I don't deserve these things, but it just means to think about yourself less. How are we lifting up the people around us? Realizing that other perspectives are going to fall short. We have to work and enjoy the party. We can't just push away all of these things, all these gifts that have been given to us, but we also need to remember that it's not all about the party. There's work that needs to be done. It's good to celebrate milestones in our lives, but what are you doing it for? Are you doing it to show off your wealth? Are you buying things you don't need to impress people you don't like? Or are you doing it to honor, celebrate, share in some joy, bring more people together? What is the purpose behind it? What is the intention? And so as we wonder to think about how to be more like Jesus, or if Jesus was in our midst right now, how do we handle our money? How do we handle our time? What is the biblical perspective on this? One of the easiest and first things we can do, and always we should do, is pray. It's super simple. I know most of you do this, but it's a good reminder to carry this out in our lives. And it can be a simple prayer, especially when we have extra money. If we come into extra money or we have some extra time in our day, asking this question to God. Lord, what do you want to do through me to accomplish your mission here? Starting with God first, centering first on God, asking God, what is your mission here? Not to come up with my plan, not to say, this is how I want to financially spend my money. I've talked to my financial planner. God, I want to fit you in now to my little check boxes here in my plan, but I want to start with you, God. What is your mission? And how are you going to work through me to do it? Because you need to have dreams. Absolutely. Please have dreams, have missions, have visions. But start it first with God, because realizing whatever your imagination is, whatever your dreams are, God's will always be bigger. God's will always be greater, and it will be more magnificent to do it together with God. So it's always great to lean in to God for that guidance. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we give you thanks for the multitude of gifts you have poured upon each and every one of us, God. Please empower us and help us to be grateful for those gifts, but to share those gifts for one another, not to bottle them up just for ourselves, but to pour them out to better reflect your light and love in this world, God. God, thank you for loving us and giving us grace. Even sometimes when we don't feel like we deserve it, we know and we can rest in that knowledge that you give it to us freely, not expecting anything in return. And God, thank you for empowering us to care for our neighbors. We know that you don't need our good works, but our neighbors absolutely do, God. So empower us to seek your guidance with our time and with our money, to put you first in our lives, God. We lift all these things up to you, and it's in your holy name we pray. Amen. Thank you, guys.